Greetings summoners to lots of lore. Today we'll be covering Pantheon, first his bio, the Artisan of War, then his first color story, the Spear of Targon, his second color story, the Unbreakable Spear, and his third color story, For Those Who Have Fallen. So, sit back and enjoy. The peerless warrior known as Pantheon is a nigh unstoppable paragon of battle. He was born among the Rakor, a warlike people living on the flank of Mount Targon, and after climbing the mountain's treacherous peak and being deemed worthy, he was chosen to become the earthly incarnation of the celestial aspect of war. Imbued with inhuman power, he relentlessly seeked the enemies of Targon, leaving only corpses in his wake. Atreus was a proud young Rakoran, named after one of the 4 stars that formed the warrior constellation in the night sky. The constellation known to the Rakor as Pantheon. While not the fastest or strongest of the young warriors of Mount Targon, nor the most skilled with bow, spear or blade, Atreus was determined, single-minded, and his endurance was legendary among his peers. Every day before dawn, while others slept, he rose to run the treacherous path of Mount Targon, and he was ever the last to leave the training grounds at night, his arms leaded from blade work. A fierce rivalry developed between Atreus and another young Rakoran, a boy called Pylus. Born into a line of renowned warriors, Pylus was skillful, strong, and popular. He seemed destined for greatness, and none of his age could beat him in the fighting circle. Only Atreus refused to back down, pushing himself up from the ground to fight on, bloody and bruised, and even after being knocked down again and again. While this earned Atreus the respect of his grizzled instructor, it gained him the enmity of Pylus, who took Atreus' unrelenting defiance as a lack of respect. Atreus was shunned by his peers and suffered numerous beatings from Pylus and his followers, though he endured it all with stoic resilience, and he kept his growing ostracism a secret from his family, knowing it would only cause them pain. On an early winter patrol, a day's march from the village, the young warriors and their trainers came upon the smoking ruin of a Rakoran outpost. Blood stained the snow, and bodies lay strewed across the ground. A hasty retreat was ordered, but it was too late. The enemy was already upon them. Clad in furs and heavy iron armor, the outsiders sprang from beneath the snow, axes flashing in the cold light. None of the young warriors had completed their training, and their superiors were all greybeards, well past their prime. Yet several enemies were slain for every one of their own that fell. Nevertheless, the outsiders outnumbered them, and the Rakor were cut down one by one. Pylus and Atreus fought back to back, the last of the Rakor still standing. Both were injured and bleeding. The battle would be over in moments, yet they knew they had to warn the village. Atreus plunged his spear into the barbarian's throat, while Pylus cut down 2 or more, creating a momentary gap in the circle of enemies. Atreus told Pylus to go, saying that he would hold off the enemies so Pylus could get away. With no time to argue, Atreus was already charging the enemy. Pylus ran. Atreus fought hard, but as a heavy axe slammed into his chest, he finally fell and slipped into unconsciousness. Atreus awoke, not in the celestial afterlife as he had expected, but upon the mountain where he had fallen. The sun had dropped beneath the surrounding peaks, and a fresh layer of snow covered him. Numb and barely lucid, he pushed himself to his feet. He picked his way between the bodies of the fallen Rakor, but they were all dead. Worse, Pylus laid some way off, a throwing axe embedded in his back. Word had not reached their village. Half crawling, half stumbling to Pylus' side, Atreus found his one-time rival alive, but horribly wounded. Hefting the young warriors to his shoulders, Atreus began the long trek home. 3 days later, he stumbled to the outskirts of their village and finally allowed himself to collapse. He awoke to find Pylus watching over him and his wounds stitched and bound. While Atreus was relieved to find their village had not been attacked, he was also surprised to learn that neither the Rakor nor the Solari Elder had sent out the Ra-Horak to find and kill the intruders, choosing instead to stay and defend against any possible attack. In the months that follow, Atreus and Pylus became close friends, all earlier antagonism forgotten. They threw themselves into their training with renewed vigor and purpose. All the while Atreus' resentment towards the Solari Order grew. He felt the best way to protect the Rakor was to actively seek out and destroy their would-be enemies. But the new leader of the Solari warriors, a former member of their own tribe, Leona, preached a different form of protection, which Atreus felt was weak and passive. As with all young Rakorans, Atreus and Pylus had grown up hearing stories of great heroes climbing the peak of Mount Targon and being blessed with great powers. Having passed the arduous Rakoran warriors' rites together, the pair began to train in earnest towards making the ascent themselves. Atreus hoping to gain the power he would need to seek out and defeat the enemies of Rakor himself. Since it seemed the Solari were not willing to do so, only the strongest attempt the climb, and fewer than 1 in 1,000 even glimpses the peak. Nevertheless, Atreus and Pylus joined the largest group from all the Rakoran villages scattered around the foothill of the mountain and began the ascent. As they set off, the sun turned dark as the silver moon passed before it. Some saw this as an ill omen, but Atreus took it as a sign he was on the right path, that his belief about the Solari were correct. After weeks of climbing, the group was half its original size. Some had turned back, while others had been claimed by the mountain, having fallen into crevices, being buried beneath avalanches, or frozen to death in the night. They were high above the cloud line, and the skies was filled with strange shifting lights and illusions. Still, they pressed on. The air grew steadily thinner, and the cold even more bitter, as the weeks turned into months. Several climbers stopped to catch their breath, never to move again, their flesh freezing to the mountain. Others, driven insane by the lack of air and exhaustion, threw themselves from the cliffs, falling like stones. One by one, the mountain claimed those who attempted to master it, until only Pylus and Atreus remained. Exhausted, frozen, and their minds addled, the pair made the final ascent to the summit, only to find nothing. They saw no fabled city at the peak, nor any sky warriors heroes waiting to embrace them. Only ice, death, and rocks twisted into strange circular shapes. Pylus collapsed, the last of his strength finally giving out, and Atreus roared his frustration. Knowing Pylus had not the strength to make the descent, Atreus sat with him, cradling his head in his lap as he watched the life drain from his friend. Then the heavens opened, the air shimmering like liquid, and a gateway opened before Atreus. Golden light spilled out, warming his face, and the city beyond the veil could be glimpsed. A place of inconceivable architecture and grandiose vision. A figure stood waiting for him, hand outstretched. Tears of awe ran down Atreus' face. He would not have left his friend behind, but as he looked down, he saw that Pylus had died in his arms, a beatific smile upon his face. Atreus stood, closed his friend's eyes, and laid him gently on the melting snow. He stepped forward to meet his guide, walking through the veil of reality to the real Targon. Months passed. On the lower flank of the mountain, it was assumed that Atreus and Pylus had died along with everyone else who attempted to ascend. They were mourned, but this was nothing unusual, nor was it unexpected. Only once in a generation did someone return with power from the top of the mountain. It was at this time another raiding party of northern barbarians mysteriously appeared on the mountain, almost a year to the day since they had butchered those Rakorans at the outpost and Atreus' peers. They attack a number of isolated villages, slaughtering and pillaging, before pushing towards a Solari shrine high upon the mountain. The gods there were heavily outnumbered, yet they stood ready to die defending the relics and mystics within. As the enemy's marauders closed in, An unnatural keening wind descending, whipping the snow around in a growing fury. The swirling clouds parted, exposing the full majesty of Mount Targon at the epicenter of the storm. Warriors on both sides struggled to maintain their footing, shielding their eyes against the ice storm as a ghostly, glowing city appeared in the heaven at the mountain's apex. The 4 stars of the Pantheon constellation pulsed brightly, then turned dark overhead. Simultaneously, the burning light of a falling star appeared within the ethereal city and streaked towards the ground. It screamed towards the temple, moving at astonishing speed. The barbarians prayed to their heathen gods in quivering voices. The streaming light slammed down, striking the ground between the 2 forces with an earth-shattering impact. This was no star, but a warrior mantled in starlight and bearing a glimmering golden shield and spear of legend. He had landed in a warrior's crouched, one knee lowered to the ground, and as he looked up at the enemies defiling the land of Mount Targon, the Wrecker-Ran saw that it was Atreus. And yet not Atreus. The aspect of the warrior had infused him, and he was now both mortal and immortal, the incarnation of war made flesh. He was now an avatar of battle. He had become the Pantheon. He rose from his crouch, eyes blazing with celestial light, and the enemy knew death had come for them. The battle was over quickly. None could stand against Pantheon. The outsiders' blood ran from Pantheon's armor and weapon, leaving them prestige and glimmering with starlight. His enemies defeated, Pantheon marched into the roaring ice storm and disappeared. Atreus' family mourned their son and held a funeral for him. While they had suspected he was dead after he had not returned from the expedition, now his demise was confirmed. The Pantheon aspect had obliterated his personality, memories, and emotion. Atreus' flesh was nothing but a shell inhabited by the supernatural aspect of war. His mortal soul had joined those of the ancestors in the celestial afterlife. Atreus was not the first appearance of Pantheon on Runeterra. There have been others, and there will likely be more. They are not immortal, limited by the human flesh they inhabit, and can't be killed, though it takes great effort to do so. Pantheon's latest appearance has been greatly debated by the Elder of the Solari, for his arrival is both a blessing and a curse, as it often heralds a time of darkness yet to come. And now for Pantheon's first color story, The Spear of Targon. Fair warning, I do make voices for the characters in this story, so please tell me in the comments if you like it or not. A lone figure awaited the armed convoy, standing silhouetted against the sun. His heavy cloak and long plume atop of his helmet billowed in the hot, dry desert wind. A tall spear was held at his side. The convoy was 30 strong. Most of its numbers were hired mercenaries. Rough, warlike men and women garbed in hauberks, leather and chain, bearing crossbow, halberds and blades. They walked the dusty path alongside heavily laden mules, though they came to a halt, crude insult and jokes dying on their lips as they saw the warrior standing motionless before them. The dark-clad leader of the expedition frowned as he pulled his cold black steed to a halt. The figure atop the rocky outcrop made no move to stand aside. "You'll come with murder in your hearts," he said. His voice was hard as iron and strangely accent. "I'm the mountain and you shall go no further." The mercenary smirked and scoffed. "Piss off, madman!" One of them shouted, "Let's replant your head on a spike to mark our passing." "You're a long way from home, friend," the leader of the convoy said. "We journeyed to the mountain ourselves. There need be no blood spilled here." The lone warrior was unmoved. "We are simple pilgrims and still have a long journey ahead of us," said the leader. "And beside, there is no way back for us now. Our ships have sailed. See?" he said, gesturing behind him. Behind the convoy, less than a mile distant, the sea glittered like dragon scales in the dying light. A trio of galleys could be seen, sails unfurling as they turned north on the long journey home. "We come with no ill intent, I assure you," the leader continued. "We merely seek wisdom."
"Your tongue is forked, serpent," said the lone warrior. "You seek the blood of the seer. Turn aside or be slain."
The rider's frown deepened, and he turned away with a dismissive shrug. "So be it," he said. "Kill him." In an instant, crossbows were hafted to shoulders, and the air was filled with loosed bolts. The lone warrior was not punched from his feet, however, the bolts clang as they ricocheted from his heavy, circular shield. Then he began to advance. He appeared to be in no hurry. He strode forward with grim resolve, still silhouetted against the sun, the tip of his spear lowering towards his enemies. Another flurry of crossbow bolts. Again, they were turned aside by his shield. The first of the snarling mercenaries launching herself towards him, a jagged-blade scimitar arcing in for his throat. She died in the blink of an eye, the warrior's spear buried in her chest. The next two died almost as quickly, as the warrior's spear slashed a crimson line across one man's throat and the rim of his shield cracked another's skull. "Take him!" roared the expedition's leader, drawing an exquisite, bespoke pistol from his waistband. A cloud passed in front of the sun, allowing the warrior to be seen more clearly. He was bedecked in armor of archaic design, though his arms and leg were bare and tautly muscled. His cloak was deep crimson, though in the twilight it seemed as if stars glinted in the shimmering fabric. The starlight also glittered in his unrelenting gaze, shadowed within the vision slide of his helm. The lone warrior moved like liquid, every movement smooth, efficient and deadly. He was impossibly fast, faster than any man should be. More mercenaries died, their blood stained the dry desert ground. None could land a blow upon the deadly fighter. He moved effortlessly through the battle, closing inexorably on the horsemen. One by one, the mercenaries were slain. In moments, those still standing turned and fled in the face of this unstoppable foe. The rider leveled his pistol at the lone warrior and fired. Impossibly, he swayed aside at the last moment, and the shot merely scraped across the side of his helm. The leader swore and cocked his pistol for another shot, but he was too slow. The warrior's shield took him square in the chest, and he was hurled from the saddle. He fell heavily and grimaced as the warrior's foot came down on his torso, pinning him to the ground.
"Who are you?"
he hissed.
"I am your death,"
said the lone warrior.
"I am Pantheon."
The leader of the convoy turned his head to the side, seeing his pistol laying in the dust nearby. He reached for it, but it was a hopeless act of desperation.
"Rejoice, mortal," said Pantheon. "It is a great honor to die beneath the spear of Targon."
The broken man made to speak, but his words were cut short as Pantheon's spear drove down through his chest. Blood bubbled from the dying man's lips, and then he laid still. Pantheon pulled his weapon clear and turned away. Twilight had given way to dusk, and countless stars lit the night sky. A comet of burning fire streaked down towards the distant mountains, 100 miles east. Pantheon's eyes narrowed.
"It is time then,"
he said to the darkness, and began the long journey back to Mount Targon. And now for Pantheon's second color story, The Unbreakable Spear. Atreus was born on the hostile slopes of Targon and named after the star constellation of war, known as the Pantheon. From an early age, he knew he was destined for battle. Like many in his tribe, he trained to join the Rakhor's militant order, the Ra-Horak. Never the strongest or the most skilled warrior, Atreus somehow persevered, standing up, bloodied and bruised after each bout. In time, he developed a fierce rivalry with a fellow recruit, Pylus. But no matter how often Atreus was cast onto the stones, he stood back up. Pylus was impressed with his unrelenting endurance, and though their blood there spilled in the training circle, a true brotherhood was born. Atreus and Pylus were among the Rakhor who stumbled across a barbarian incursion, surviving the ambush that left the rest of their patrol dead. When the aspect of the sun refused to destroy these trespassers, Atreus and Pylus swore to capture the power of the aspect themselves by climbing to the peak of Mount Targon. Like so many before them, they underestimated how arduous the ascent would be, with Pylus shivering his last upon finally reaching the summit. Only Atreus remained as the skies opened, making him host to a divine aspect with the power to take revenge. But it was not a man who returned to the record afterward, spear and shield glimmering with celestial might. It was the aspect of war itself, the Pantheon. Judging Atreus unworthy, a warrior who had known only defeat, it had taken control of his body in pursuit of its own ends, a task it considered too great for mortal men. Cast into the furthest corners of his own mind, Atreus endured only vague visions as the aspect scoured the world for Darking, living weapons created in a bygone age. Eventually, Pantheon was goaded into battle not far from Mount Targon by the Darkin, Aatrox, who sought the mountain's peak. Their fight raged into the skies and swept through the armies of men beneath, until the impossible occurred. The Darkin's god-killing blade was driven into Pantheon's chest, a blow that carved the constellation of war from the heavens. But as the aspect faded, Atreus, the man it had considered weak, awoke once more. Impaled upon Aatrox's blade, and with the power of the aspect's weapon dimming, he took a ragged breath and spit in the Darkin's face. Aatrox sneered and left Atreus to die. Hours later, as the crows descended, Atreus painfully stood back up, stumbling back to the record in a trail of blood. After a lifetime of defeat, his will to live and his anger at betrayal were enough to stave off the death that had claimed war itself. Atreus recovered on Pylus' homestead, nursed back to health by his friend's widow, Lula. There, Atreus realized he'd spent his life looking to the stars, never considered what lay beneath. Unlike gods, mortals fought because they must. Knowing that death lay in wait, it was a resilient he saw in all life, the threats unending. Indeed, barbarian invaders now threatened the Record's northern settlements, including Lula's farm. Though it was months before he could lift a spear, Atreus was determined to end this scourge himself, and eventually set out with the aspect's stalled weapons in hand. Yet, when he arrived, he found his sworn enemies already under siege. He knew from their cries, from the overwhelming stench of blood, they faced Aatrox. It was Aatrox who had driven the barbarians into Targon, Atreus realized. Though he considered them his foes, they were much like the Record, mortal who suffered in a conflict between greater powers. Atreus felt a cold rage at both the Darkin and the Aspects. They were no different. They were the problem. Atreus put himself between the barbarians and Aatrox. Recognizing the battered shield and spear of the fallen Aspect, the Darkin mocked him. What hope had Atreus now without the Pantheon's power? But even though Aatrox's blow cast him to his knees, Atreus' own will reignited the Aspect spear upon hearing the cries of people around him. And with a mighty leap, he struck a blow that severed the Darkin's sword arm. Both blade and Darkin fell to the ground. Only Atreus still stood and watched his namesake star blaze back to life in the heavens. Though he often yearned to return to Lula's farm, Atreus vowed that day to stand against Aspect, Ascended, demons, and any who wield power so great it can only destroy. Forsaking his own name, he has become a new Pantheon. The Aspect's weapon fueled by the will to fight that can only exist in the face of death. For with the divine Pantheon gone, war must be reborn in man. And now for Pantheon's third and last color story, for those who have fallen. Again, I make voices in this one, but only very few. This story is told from Atreus' perspective, so enjoy! When I land in Naya Mesas, it does not feel as if I had leapt, celestial magic burning my path across the sky, but as if I have fallen. I am, after all, only a man. Around me on the swirling dunes, a cohort of Ra-Horak fights. Solari warriors far from the temples of Mount Targon. They have marched with 50 spears 3 weeks into the desert, a distance I have crossed in moments. to investigate a power that grows even as their own wanes. Here, the sun they worship is so constant, it is as if the shadows of the past are still burned into the desert. Their outline all that remains of an empire long lost, buildings now covered in dunes, a sun once meant to raise men into the heavens, now dulled and fallen to earth. Shurima was born and died here. It was in Naramasis the first Ascendant were created, meant to defend Shurima against any threat. Those that outlived the Empire were driven mad by long centuries of conflict, becoming darkened and laying waste to the world before being contained. But, as I well know, some abomination birthed by Shuriman hubris live on. The sound of metal ring in my ear, as a spear whips past my helm, then another, and another. The ringing raises into a full battle cry as the Ra-Horak unleash their might. Yet, as steel fills the sky, a blast of magic tears through the spear's path, carving a swath of destruction through the ruins. Once the dust clears, I see it. The reason I have come. A creature looms, burning and broken like the empire it would rule. It is unlike any Ascendant I have ever seen. A shattered god that has claimed this fallen city and would see it rise again. But once, it too was a man. I will remind it what that means. To draw breath in the face of destruction. I will remind them all.
The God Warrior,
one of the Ra-Horak cries.
We cannot defeat it. Let me show you how a god dies.
I bellow in response and charge towards the creature, raising my spear. It is with their power the spear glows. The power of the gods, the power of the stars. My muscles strain to bear the strange weight of the magic, as the creature unleashes another blast from within its shattered form. My spear is not burned away as the Ra-Horak's were, but instead it burns with its own light. It streaks like a comet towards the Ascendant, casting it to the earth and its blast into the heavens. Before me, only feet from the rent opened by the creature's blast, a Ra-Horak cradles the body of a fallen warrior. Her own arm has been scorched by magic, where she sought to shield him from the attack. You are an aspect, she said, though in her eye I can see the desperation. She's pleading, begging me to say yes, so that I can save her, so that I can save her friend. All around, the Ra-Horak lines are broken, along with the will to fight. I do not answer, as the spear is called back to my hand by the magic she craves. Its return an echo of my own thrust. The Ascendant has left no blood upon its tip, only sand. It possesses no flesh other than magic and stone. I want to tell her my name, that I'm Atreus, that I too was once a Ra-Horak looking to the skies for the power to save me. But that man is dead. He died on Targon's peak along with his brother, Pylus. Slain by the Pantheon and by his own failures. And no matter how hard I try, I can bring neither Atreus nor Pylus back. Even the god is gone, its constellation torn from the heavens. Instead, I turn to face the creature once more.
You must fight,
I tell the Ra-Horak simply.
You all must.
Around us, the ruined city burns as the Ascendant magic refuses to fade. I run over sand fused into glass, each new blast of magic shaking the whole world until it feels like the earth itself must fall apart. That only the heavens will remain, but I refuse to give up. I see Ballistae abandoned on the ground. The Ra-Horak raised their shield against debris cast from falling buildings, disappearing into dust.
Fight! You must all fight!
I yell louder, my voice carrying more of the god's authority than I would like. And then I am upon it, my spear slashing into the Ascendant, cutting across the broken stone its boast instead of a face. This close, its blast crashed into my shield, pushing me backward. I slash again, my spear trailing magic, and again. I raise my shield only just in time to deflect the Ascendant's wrath. My feet digs into the dirt. I struggle to hold the beast at bay, as the magic beats into me with the Ascendant's will, made only stronger by cruelty and rage. I push against it, snarling, The power lances off the shield wildly in every direction, cutting through the ruins, the sky, and through the Rahurak, still cowering beneath both. My hands begin to shake, and it is not to the warrior, but to myself that I growl against lungs, gasping for air.
Fight!
The creature's eyes narrow. It knows. The earth beneath me can no longer hold. My strength can no longer hold. As I fall back to earth, the magic in my spear dies, and the helm clatters from my coughing face. I spit blood into the dirt, and struggle to raise my head, but all I can see of Narumeseth is that one Rahurak warrior, framed by smoke and chaos. As she looked back at me, into eyes only now revealed, and for the first time sees something other than an aspect. The man who cradled Pylus as snow formed from his dying breath. I wonder if she recognized the star and my destiny tattooed upon my chest, the scar that cuts through them. It is no longer pleading that shows in her eyes, as I see the light grow on her face. The creature gathers power for one more blast. Though her arm is ruined, and though her friend lies still, she picks up her shield and begins stumbling towards me, as inevitable and determined as death.
What is your name?
I cough through ragged breaths, and still the light grows brighter. Asose, she says flimsily, as she stands beside me and turns her shield to face the blast. The ruins fill with impossible brightness that promise to burn everything away until it does, and only darkness is left. There is no more power, no more aspect. Where Asose once stood, there is nothing, only my memory. But still, I can feel my scar throbbing with pain, reminding me I'm alive and of every moment that brought me here. My brother in arms, Pylus, telling me to stop getting blood on his victory. The barbarian raid, each of us near death. Collapsing upon Targon's pinnacle. The darking blade cutting through death to awake me again. Empyrean weed clinging to the mountain. The mud on my hands as I put down the plow and pick up the spear. All of that would be nothing without a woman taking up her shield, knowing that she would not survive, but that she would fight. Her power, her sacrifice, so much greater than that of the stars, so much greater than mine, and the weapons of the aspect that have kept me safe. It will not be in vain. As I struggle to my feet, broken, I see the shadow of the Rahurak emerging from cover, eclipsing the sun disk cradled behind me in the center of the ruins. I rise with them, not as a god, but as a man. My Pantheon, all who have fallen earning me another moment, all who have lived and all who have died facing a moment of truth, where they must decide why they fight, who they love, what they truly are. What are gods before this courage? They are nothing.
Asose!
I yell into the ruins, though my ribs stick into my lungs.
Asose!
The Rahurak call back. They too stand amidst the rubble, their shadow looming all the larger as the ascending gathers magic again. And though I am broken, and though the god is dead, I feel the power ignite once more in my spear. As the plume on my helm bursts alight, it is calling me to battle. As the Rahurak casts the spear once more, and for a moment a star lost with the constellation of war gleams brighter than the sun. Her name was Asose. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes Pantheon, the Unbreakable Spear. If you like this, then give it a like. If you think others will like it, then share it to them. And please tell me what I can do better down in the comments, and if you want more of this lore reading. And maybe you should consider subscribing, since I might just make more. But until next time, enjoy.